You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio, and we've got a very special show on today, as a matter of fact, and I think you're going to find it quite interesting from a number of different aspects, and it's going to be called Delta Force, and we've got the daughter of the colonel that put together Delta Force back a number of years ago. She's on the line, Connie Beckwith Howe, and Beckwith, I should say. And Connie, welcome to America's Web Radio.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, it should be fun, and I want to put a shout out and thank the folks that, and I'll ask you while we're talking about it what you think of it. But Rick White and the folks at the Georgia Military Veterans Museum, or not museum, but Hall of Fame, have given me a list, and we're going to be doing a lot of Vietnam veterans and a lot of veterans and their stories and their family stories over the next few weeks. And Rick White was kind enough to give me Connie's information, and he is, as is everybody, quite in awe with Delta Force, and as we remember. And Connie, when was Delta Force? When did your father have the crystal ball and say, "This is what we need"?
Well, he realized there was a need for this. You know, when he served with the British SAS, and that was, that back in the around 1961 or so. And so after he was there, he came back with had that vision that, gosh, America needs some sort of elite unit like the SAS. Things were just starting to get kind of bubbling up in these other Middle East countries. So he just always had that in the back of his mind. I believe he even did maybe his thesis or big, report when he was at Command and General, I guess it was the Staff College, when you go to as a captain at Leavenworth, where he did a paper on this. And nobody really seemed to be interested. And so but then he just kind of, things kept going on in the world, and then he just felt like, he just pushed it through.
And things are still going on in the world, and
yes.
Delta Force is still very much
There's a need for it.
Part of the military. I want to set the record straight from the beginning, and I've been called a lot of things, like nutty as a fruitcake. So if this is a fruitcake question, you can answer it that way. But am I mistaken, or is Delta Force the first and only once, I think, military unit, if you want to call it a unit, or whatever you want to call it, but organization that was called in to a civilian situation?
That I honestly don't know the entire answer to. To my knowledge, the Delta had been called in, but that doesn't mean there were not other agencies that may have also been called in, that I don't know.
Okay, well, I didn't mean to throw you a hardball or anything.
No, I mean, I remember, I know that they did support, I think, Olympics, maybe a prison, some sort of thing.
I think you just hit it on the head, or what I was thinking about, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but is the prison situation. We had there were no SWAT teams, there were no anything that had the training that Delta Force did.
True.
Okay, so I've got that question off the table. Now I'm going to ask another extremely hard question. How many Delta Force movies have been made? I know there's a Chuck Norris one, but...
I mean, I think Chuck Norris, and I think there was even like a funny one, with, now I can't think of the actor.
Oh, the fat guy?
No.
Oh.
well, maybe was it James Coburn? Was he in the one with Chuck Norris?
I don't remember.
Truthfully, I don't think I ever watched any of the. I don't think I watched it, but there really haven't. There's never been like a realistic, like something that would be a good movie based on the actual mission, that got aborted.
Interesting. And those were, I don't know, I remember the Chuck Norris movie, and I've seen it, I just don't remember a whole lot about it, so forth.
Yeah.
So your father had been in the military quite some time when he came up with the idea?
Yes. He graduated from the University of Georgia in, I believe, 1952. He and my mother got married, and then he did his training at Fort Benning as an infantryman, and then he ended up going to Korea for just a short stint. So from 53 to, 71-ish, 2-ish, that's how long, but I mean, he didn't really push it until he'd been to, after he'd been to the Command General Staff College.
Was 62? You say something like that. So did he do a tour in Nam?
He did 2 tours in Vietnam.
Okay, and was part of this idea that he had for a Delta Force come from the treatment? Rick White, Colonel White, and I talked about this when he was on last week, but. And I was in the Army, but nothing, absolutely zero, nothing. But, we couldn't even, or we were told not to wear our uniforms through the airports as we traveled.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it was, there wasn't that much, quote, unquote, violence. But did your father, do you think, the treatment of military through airports and then traveling back in the 60s and really early 70s, did that have anything to do with his decision and the thoughts that terrorism is coming our way?
I really think after his assignment with the SAS and seeing the way they trained, because they were the elite unit that was going and doing things, he was just so impressed with their work ethic, how officers and enlisted interacted, kind of that common sense approach, but at the same time, work hard, get the job done. And then I think, again, there were things going on that we as Americans didn't really know about that were bubbling up. If you go back in history, you can see almost the beginnings of terrorism, especially with Great Britain, because they had certain holdings in like Yemen, and so I think he kind of had an upper hand, like knowing, okay, these things are going on. And I guess when he came back, home, of course he was, in Special Forces, mm-hmm. which is kind of considered, well, now more of the elite, but back then the Special Forces guys, were kind of considered the rebels.
Yeah.
So he just always,
mm-hmm.
I don't think he had any, as far as, I think he just had a pulse of things that were going on in the world that, again, he was just getting read in on with, that it all stemmed really from his being an exchange officer with the SAS that really got this off the ground.
Okay, now this was, and I may have my history muddled a bit, but back in that time period, wasn't the terrorism of England, and particularly London and so forth, from the Northern Irish?
There was some of that, but there was also, like I said, I've just been reading lately, there were some bubblings of other things that I don't think really realized that were starting to trickle up. But you're absolutely right. There was all that, and that's what kind of got people, the training, and just these cells were starting to grow. And would something like that, could a cell, there were things going on starting in South America. I mean, just It was just almost like one thing, like a domino effect was starting to, they just had to, so anyway.
One of the things that I've said this many times, and probably to the boredom of our audience, but, I love the United States, and I don't mean this critically, but if we have failed since inception, in my opinion, it's in foreign policy. And I'm not sure we have a foreign policy today, in fact. But I say that in jest, sort of speak. But we have been so blessed and have gotten from point A to point D or E or wherever we're at today. And we sort of have taken, or it seems to me like we've taken the attitude, well, it doesn't matter we are who we are, and we don't really care. We're going to do our thing, and nobody's going to mess with us, and we're bigger and better than everything.
Oh, I mean, I totally agree. I think our Americans have really gotten naive. Everyone takes it for granted. There's absolutely no sense of, what's going on. There's kind of an ignorance going around that that we're going to be fine.
Yeah.
But that's just not the way it is.
And it's happening over there, not here. And this was sort of, let's sell the Japanese a lot of steel and see what they're going to do with it.
Well, I mean, I will tell you, I remember being at my house in Fort Bragg, probably during college, so that was before the Iranian raid, when my dad was getting everything ready, and we were sitting at the dining room table, and he said, one of these days, terrorism's going to be in this country. But no, and it went right over me. I'm like, well, whatever. I didn't really realize that his words were so true. And the people didn't believe it, even back in the 70s.
Oh yeah, and
people don't want to believe it now, even after we've had attacks.
Even more so back in the 60s, and in some ways I feel like we're reliving the mentality of the 60s right now.
I agree.
And it's a shame, and I don't know what to do other than have shows like this on that tell the truth and hopefully wake some people up as we go down the road. But
I know
it is incredible. In the 60s, I never saw anything like that in the 60s, and I've never seen anything like today ever. And people, they just don't want to believe it. Or whatever.
Yeah, our country's in big trouble, and people just don't want to. They're just not wanting to believe anything, or they're easily led. They're so brainwashed by, the way the media and the culture of our world is now, that they really, I don't think, have a clue.
You hit something on the head there, brainwashed. And I grew up in the Cold War, okay, and supposedly it was all over with when Reagan had Gorbachev tear down that wall. Well, folks, we're in as big a Cold War today as we've ever been in my opinion.
I agree.
And we're going to take a break and come back and be with Connie Howe right after a couple of messages. Thanks for listening.
The disease of addiction is...
How we doing, Connie?
Hey, everything okay, you think?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We can say anything on my radio station.
Okay. I'm like, oh gosh, are people going to be like, whatever. I don't. We have the right to voice our opinion.
Yeah, and people are going to be just like you said, whatever anyway. So I don't really care.
Yeah.
And, we go after them from every angle, and on television, on Fox and Friends today, they copy us. And we did a show on Tuesday night about the second death from vaping.
Yes.
And guess what was on Fox and Friends today?
Really?
Oh yeah, they do this all the time. And I wouldn't be surprised if you don't get a call from them.
Well,
It
I
would
doubt
not surprise
that.
me. No, it
Anyway.
would not surprise me at all. If they like what we're doing, and they copy it all the time. So,
Interesting.
yeah, they've done it with our car show. They've done it with some of our medical shows. That 2 or 3 days after the show airs, son of a gun, there will be. And today they were using lines from the show. I mean, not
Oh my gosh.
just copying the idea, but they were using direct things that we had said or what the doctor had said.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Interesting.
yeah. I guess imitation is the best form of flattery or whatever.
Oh yes. For sure.
Anyway, such is life.
Yep, I know.
Us Texans, it doesn't bother too much.
We're tough, right?
You
Even
got
though, I do feel like a Texan since I've lived here for almost 20 years, so sometimes I really wish I always wonder why didn't any of my Georgia people come on over to Texas so I could, claim somebody that lived in Texas before. But anyway.
Well, you can claim me. We can be kissing cousins.
That's
or something.
right.
I grew up in Lubbock, graduated from Tech, and still own a farm out there.
Oh, I have a friend who is from Lubbock. They were Keys, Dwayne Key. And did you know any Keys there?
Doesn't ring a bell, but they would know. If you ever, do you still talk to them?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. Ask them how they loved the brick streets in Lubbock. My grandfather's company put them down. Okay, we're coming back.
Okay.
All right, and we're back on America's Web Radio with our very special guest. And Connie, I'm going to ask you up front. Do you mind coming back and being on again in the future?
No, I don't mind at all.
Good, because I love talking to you, and the military. Well, I have a son that's in the Air Force and stationed in Germany, and so the military has been near and dear to me. I was nothing in the Army, but I was did my time in uniform, and it's, as I think you will agree with, the military, and it's all branches. You're in the Army, but you're also in the Air Force and Navy and everything else, really. And it's the biggest fraternity or sorority in the world. And
agreed.
There's a common denominator of the person that served with the other person that served, and I think it's even. I know I look old enough to have been in the Civil War, but I can't address it like I can some later years. But it seems like even with the volunteer Army and the volunteer service, it's gotten closer than it was during the draft and so forth, and the lottery.
I think you're right.
And it's, you make your decision, I want to go serve. And after your father, or when did you went into the military, correct?
Yes, after I graduated from Georgia, I was commissioned through ROTC in 1978.
Oh, okay. And what was your MOS?
I was a quartermaster officer, supply and logistics.
Ah. And when I was in, and this was, like I said, during Vietnam, but as I recall, I think it was the figure that it takes 5 behind to support the one in front. And that's what you were doing, in logistics and in supplies. You're making sure that everybody has their everything from their bullets to the brass. And
well, I wanted, of course, I wanted to be a parachute rigger. I didn't want to be and so I knew that quartermaster, that's where the riggers were. But then, and I wanted to go to the 82nd Airborne, and my father had made sure that never happened. So, and all this I never knew until later.
Ah.
So anyway, but I did finally get to go to rigger school and then be, in the reserves with it.
He didn't want you jumping out of planes with
he just didn't want me to be around in the 82nd. He just knew back, you got to remember, back in my day, women were just starting to come in, and it was just a whole different world. Than that's just the way it was.
Well, like I'm amazed in that when I was in, and it was probably not too much before you, but like there was no officer enlisted personnel. There was no fraternization, period.
Right.
Enlisted person didn't fraternize with an officer or go out to dinner with them or have lunch with them or anything else unless it happened to be brought in. But no fraternization, I believe, was the term. And today, some of my son's best friends are enlisted people. And
yeah.
Totally changed.
I think that a lot of that has to do with our enlisted are now are educated. It's a whole different culture. It's not, and so you have, I think, things that's made things change a bit.
Oh, I'm sure. We when I did basic and AIT. It was sort of mind-boggling to our DIs, our drill instructors, in that my basic platoon, everybody had their degree, their college degree.
That's unusual.
And then when I went into AIT, it was almost, not quite, but almost the same thing, that everybody had a degree, and unfortunately, many of the drill instructors, the DIs, were lucky if they graduated from high school.
Exactly.
Back then. And so there was a little, not really animosity as much as just it was a different form of competitiveness, if that's a word, and it would mess up their heads that, well, you got to do it over and over and over again for you people to catch on what we're talking about, and we'd run through it the first time and it was done.
Exactly.
So, you're right. Things have changed, and the only thing that I would like to see, and I'm sure that your father would have agreed with this, is that I really, it's a pet peeve. It's a real, I don't know. I have a real problem with it when our politicians make military decisions and they've never worn the boots.
Totally agree.
But
it's just a fact of life, just the way it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, who
we
knows?
Don't,
Maybe we can change it someday.
It would be nice, but it's really, really hard when you do have, politicians making general officers do something they really shouldn't be doing or don't really want to do.
Yeah. And one's behind a desk and one's got dirt on his boots. And they have no idea. They have no idea what it's like to be shot at or anything else. And, there have been... And another thing that a lot of folks don't understand, which I was taken aback until I went out to Missouri, Fort Leonard Wood, and as a civilian doing some business there, and I drive up, and I'm not sure we'd have a military today if it wasn't for contract labor. Well,
that's probably true.
It's a scary thought, but they're the cooks and bottle washers, and now they're the MPs at many gates, and I just, I'm sorry, that ain't the way it's supposed to be, in my opinion.
Well, that's they've cut the military so short that they've made that the necessity.
Yeah, and then it boils over to those contract folks go to the battlefield, and it's just I don't know. I have a problem with it all. But
I'm with you. I think you and I are on the same page.
I don't. But this is why we're doing the show, is to, one, bring a different look, tone, and smell to folks of Vietnam. And we were, I guess, my business, and I was in high school and had started my first radio job when I was in high school, and I covered Kennedy's assassination for my station, and from the station. I didn't fly to Dallas immediately, but worked at the station, and then Vietnam had just really started up and was beginning to boil, and had I done then what they do today, I would have been fired in a second. We were told that you read and you report news. You don't throw in your opinion.
Right.
And today we don't get news, we get opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sad. And it people don't, or a lot of folks don't understand how somebody's opinion about the military can hurt deeply into the military. And if they're giving their opinion, which is not necessarily the truth, it's even worse. So,
right.
And our military is the best in the world, and the folks that are in it are the best in the world, in my opinion. So,
I agree.
And it's I think it should come first in the funding of everything from medical to equipment and up and down the gambit. They should be first. They're the ones that keep us where we can talk, where the jerks can be politician and the jerks can be on some television station or whatever. So, we agree. All right, let's talk more about your dad and the Delta Force. And he got his training basically, or the idea, from SAS, right?
Yes, because he was special Green Beret. He'd had, and then his Vietnam training with special forces, smaller, unconventional warfare, guerrilla warfare. That was what he knew, and of course all that now that's how we fight. Unconventional, things have completely changed from tanks, armor, all that. So,
I can remember guys saying, "God, you wouldn't believe Vietnam. All that green stuff, the jungles, and they don't play fair. They hide behind a tree, And we were used to. I think when we went into Vietnam, we were almost fighting the colonial war all over again, or something, or didn't understand.
Yeah, we didn't learn from history at all.
No, and again, I say that this is where we've made terrible mistakes. And, they used to make fun of any general that was a historian, and we know the best of them. And Patton was quite a historian, but they made fun of his when he would say something about history. And yet, like we all know, and this is what's scary today, is that history repeats itself. Well,
it was like in Somalia. People didn't think, oh, the Somalis, they can't do anything. Huh?
Yeah.
They showed us. It was the same mentality that we have, that we're bigger, better, we're smarter, but we're in their backyard, and that's what seems like we forget. Like in Vietnam, we were in their place.
These guys have hospitals set up in tunnels?
Yeah.
How unique. Underground, son of a gun. And we were, well, and again, in my opinion, the Vietnam War didn't turn out like it should have, and it turned out to be a politicians' war.
Mm-hmm.
And that was wrong and sent the wrong message to the rest of the world, in my opinion. And then the Iranians challenged us again. And I don't know. It's
yeah, and we're coming full circle right now with Iran. Just no telling.
Well, I don't know. I feel like we have, just again, my opinion, not that it's military leadership per se, but maybe political leadership is a bit better than it was back then.
I agree.
So, well, yeah, you and I bet we probably drink the same stuff.
I think so. I think so.
But I mean, it's, and there's another term that just, well, I tell you what, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with Connie right after this. And Connie, thank you. If you don't mind holding on for a little while, we'll be right back.
Sure.
45 years of experience is behind.
We do agree on a lot.
I mean, we do, and I'm not just saying yes or no, sir. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying.
By the way, I'd have to be the one saying yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am, not yes. So.
But I do think that there are more people than we realize that are pro our administration.
Oh, I do too.
I think it's just all the dirtbags that live in the cities. Like New York, San Francisco, L.A. That's where we're getting all this. All the negativity. But I think most of the nation, I think they're thrilled with what's going on.
I think you're right, and he doesn't mind standing up for us.
No, not one bit. I love it. I love that. He's not a politician.
No.
He doesn't care what people think about him.
And he's got a good-looking wife.
He sure does.
and it's a shame that she is so smart.
I have my daughter. Was in the Air Force, and so she has a friend that now flies on Air Force One.
Oh, fantastic! I had a friend that used to fly.
But he says that Melania is like the classiest, nicest, sweetest lady ever. And it just she's just so down to earth. But nobody ever gets. No, they won't ever say anything about her. They won't tell the country that she's that way.
You know what? We're fixing to. That's a good Texas term. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Fixing to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Just as long as you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
So your daughter was in the Air Force or in the
Yes.
Air Force? Or is? Or was?
She was in the Air Force for 6 years. She was on do you know what you remember what a Spectre gunship?
Yeah,
AC-130?
Sure.
She was a gunner on a AC-130.
My God, the gun was 20 times bigger than her.
Oh, yeah.
A gunner, I'll be damned.
Yeah, so she did that. But she's going to nursing school now. She's out of the Air Force. She did her time.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Huh. That's what you were saying about the Democrats are the assholes that are in in Air Force One, and the nice people like the Bushes. We're back on America's Web Radio and David's Pick, and I'm sure you all are probably. Oh well. Anyway, Connie and I were talking off mic, and I have a friend. In fact, his family, or his son, went to Texas A&M with my son, and he was a Air Force pilot and flew Air Force One, and we were talking about that, and the friend that you all have that flies, and how nice the Trumps are, and particularly Melania, and not only nice but extremely good looking, and
and down to earth.
and down to earth, and it's it's a shame that the media doesn't give her dues, because I guess they're scared of her because she's so much smarter than they are, and they probably don't know how to handle it. And it's been a fact, and you can go back and check facts of what I'm saying, that Democrats in office flying in Air Force One are not the kindest people in the world. We know of what Hillary used to say to the Secret Service and everything else, and she treated the pilots the same way. That there used to be a saying about something doesn't stink, but we won't go into that. But anyway,
I'm with you.
So just a shout out to our First Lady. She should be getting We are so lucky to have somebody like Melania Trump as our first lady, and we should be, in my opinion, exploiting it around the world. Look at this lady. She even speaks your language. And
she's an immigrant.
And she's an immigrant.
I don't get it.
I know. It's just...
yeah. Well, we do get it, but...
Yep, we do.
Yeah, anyway.
It's on the show right before... at 8 o'clock, Doctor's Lounge, and it's everything. It's in the medical profession. It's everywhere. But it's at my age, it's sort of like somebody has taken our world and bounced it like a basketball, and to see what shakes out. I've never seen it like this, and I hope that it's turning around, and I hope that it's turning around primarily for the military as well.
I hope so.
You know, we, again, I've told this story a jillion times, but I had many years ago in junior high school, we had a professor come and give us a talk and said, you don't ever have to worry about the communists bombing the United States. They want us to be their greatest asset, and they wouldn't want to destroy it. And he said the way they'll take it, the way they'll take the United States, is through our books, our literature, starting in colleges with infiltrating, putting in communistic professors, and then it'll trickle down to high school, junior high school, and finally rewriting history in elementary schools.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
That's right.
So I didn't mean for this to become a political show, Connie. I wanted it to be more about your dad, but your dad really, I think, he had a handle on it, and that's why he started Delta Force.
Oh, yeah, he really did. I mean, you know, he was no great scholar, but, you know, he was somebody that had a lot of common sense, and he got it, but he was just not in the right time at the right place, you know, for some, you know. And I think there's part of me that I'm glad that he wasn't alive to know what happened, you know, that we had a terrorist attack. You know, he would have, anyway.
He'd have re-upped it even at his age, wouldn't he?
Oh, my gosh. No telling, you know, it would have just, it would have killed him, you know. I mean, it would have just broken his heart, but...
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, you know, he just did his best. He just loved his country. He instilled patriotism into, you know, me, my sisters, everybody he was around. You know, after he died, my mom used to say, people would call her, you know, and they'd say, you don't know me, but I knew your husband, and I'll never forget, you know, he did this for me, or he helped me do that. I mean, he really instilled he really helped a lot of people, and just, you know, had that belief in our country. And I'm very thankful that, you know, he was my dad and instilled in me such a strong, you know, sense of patriotism and America.
You know, the best leaders are the best givers. And they give of their time, they give of their position, and I think their mission is to help. And as a commanding officer, you give to your troops. And that gift is survival.
Exactly.
And learning how to survive. And, you know, like I said, the best leader is the best giver. And I'm sure your dad was well respected for the gift of training and the gift of taking care of his troops.
But see, he was so good in, you know, like in the battlefield. You know, it was hard for him to push papers, you know, when he got back.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, you know, he was the best leader. But, you know, it was just, then, you know, you come back and then you have to work with, you know, people that are his colleagues that weren't good in everything else. So, anyway, he was a good leader.
And he is now, as of 2018, in the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And again, a shout out to them, a shout out to Rick White, Colonel Rick White, retired, that brought the Georgia Military Hall of Fame to Atlanta and has worked wonders with it. And we are supporting it every way we can. I didn't know it was in existence until I met Rick at a Johns Creek Veterans Association meeting, and we should all go down. It's right across from the Capitol. You've been to it, right?
Well, I have not been to their in Atlanta. I've just gone to the actual induction, the ceremony that was held in Columbus.
Okay, yeah, and I think they have another one coming up in November, I believe.
Yes, they have it. In fact, you should go to one. You should Rick needs to invite you to be a guest.
Well, he did, and
you need to go.
He even made some other passing things on the fact that we're doing this show and that we are pro-military, and it just. I don't know where, well, I do know where. It wasn't my parents because my father was in World War II, and, we've always been pro-military, not as big flag wavers as we probably should have been, but we still all supported the military. And then my generation, I guess, the ones that acted like fools in Chicago and the ones that acted like fools burning their draft cards and all this kind of stuff, they're the ones that are responsible for our kids today that don't understand the military, don't understand what the cost of freedom is.
Exactly.
And there ain't nothing in life free except my show. And beyond that, there is a price to pay, and I'm glad that we have the administration that we have that's rebuilt. I was in Hawaii while my son was stationed in Hawaii for a while, and if you want to see a grown man cry, we went out on the tarmac, and there were wonderful jets there that were being cannibalized because our infamous government wouldn't buy the parts to keep them flying. And you'd see them one after another, and it just, it was heartbreaking. Thank goodness.
It makes you sick to your stomach.
Yeah. And you wonder what's going to happen when. And I've wondered this a lot lately about these things they call millennials, and wondered if we went to war, where are our forces coming from?
You no telling.
So
I'm afraid to even think about that.
Oh, I know, and and they. I would have loved to have been sitting next to your father and watching Patton, and personally, the creep deserved to be slapped on the helmet, in my opinion. And the truth of the matter is, worse things happen to a lot of folks in the military that are never told, and they shouldn't be told. It just, if you're in the military, you're in the military, and you play by their rules. You don't make up your own. But anyway, so tell us something very unique about your father that always has stood out, even from the time you were 2 years old, sitting in his lap.
Well, my father. His father died when he was, I guess, around 9 years old. So his mother had to raise him and two other siblings, as a single female, back in the 40s. Wow. So he was raised, and I found out later from my father's best friend that she was the most strict disciplinarian, which was good. So my dad grew up, I think, being, listening, following the rules to some degree, but still knowing right and wrong. But, I guess in saying that, he wasn't somebody that was overly affectionate. We were always kind of scared of him growing up. But I guess what really kind of always hit me is I remember he really had a soft spot. I just remember the time he dropped me off at the University of Georgia. First time I saw him cry. He tried to be the tough guy all the time because he was just trying so hard to make sure, he did what was right for us. And he was the reason we didn't like him, he was so strict, but he was just so dedicated to being a good father, making sure that we were raised right. And I guess, to me, that was one of his good characteristics was, he really loved his family. He loved people. He wanted the best for them. But he also spoke his mind. He that's another thing I think now that I look back, he wasn't afraid to tell what he thought. And that might have alienated people. But, and he was also very artistic. A lot of people wouldn't know that. He would buy he would pick out all her clothes. He picked out all the furniture. He loved music. We'd come home and he'd always have the stereo. He was a very interesting man. I mean, he was more to him than what met, than you would think.
He was a bird, right?
Yes, full colonel.
Yeah, okay. So some folks out there wouldn't appreciate what you just said, but with his background and his training and what he did, probably speaking his mind and telling it like it was and is why he didn't retire with a star.
Exactly. You hit it on the nail, and that is why he never made general. He just he didn't punch tickets. Yeah. He just wasn't that type. And, in his day, you had to punch it. You did what was right. You did not. That was just, but he had the peace of mind.
You knew where to kiss and which one to kiss.
Yeah, and he never set out to be a general. I think he was happy to do what he did.
I wonder what he would think of today.
I often wonder. I really do. I think he'd be sick. I think he would just be sick. The people kneeling and Pledge of Allegiance. I can't even imagine.
This is what I guess has bothered me or certainly affected me. After 2011, I thought that this is going to be the wake-up call and that we'd get the coming together and get back to... And I wasn't born when Japan hit Pearl Harbor, but it was still, even as a 4 or 5-year-old, it was still ingrained of Americanism, and I thought that we would get back to it and hoped that we would. And 9/11 came and went, and it was sort of like, the man on the street today, what happened on 9/11? I don't know.
Well, that's because of the administration after Bush, who that tore us apart.
Yep, I totally agree. I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball, but I hope that we will pull back together, and I don't want it to have to be a catastrophe for us to do it. That
Well,
I hope that and pray that educators will do their job and do it correctly, and
I hope so too.
have our kids understand and appreciate history like never before. And I just cringe at well, we have a I don't know if you looked at our menu of shows, but we do everything from medical shows to Locked and Loaded. We're big Second Amendment station, and we're a flag-waving station, and everything else that's patriotic. And this is, we hope that people will appreciate us for telling the truth and for presenting, like the old saying is, every coin has two sides, and one side seems to be more prevalent than the other, but we're sure trying to show the other side today, and we do. And I am very critical, and I think your father would have appreciated this statement as well, is that in my opinion, our media really started going downhill. And I'll say a name that a lot of folks won't remember, but Walter Cronkite. And the coverage, it was the first coverage of almost live coverage. It wasn't live, but almost live coverage of a war, Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And Walter Cronkite did more to hurt our military than folks will ever know. And this thing of every night watching him and getting the body count. How obnoxious. I just, 5 of our guys were killed and only 7 of their guys were killed.
Yeah, it's like, people, what were they thinking?
I couldn't tell you. And and it just went on from there and got worse and worse. And it was a political war, and people didn't know it, and the media didn't tell the truth.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, they still don't. So
I was just going to say that. I know. Nothing's changed.
No.
We don't seem to ever learn.
No, we don't. So what do you do today?
Well, my husband is self-employed. He has a shooting facility where he trains law enforcement, tactical training for people all over. So I help him with his business. I do all the expense, all the background things, and then I'm very busy. I guess since we're empty nesters now, I'm very active in the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Oh, I know DAR well.
So I'm very active in that, and active in other lineage society groups, I guess you should say. And then I have 2 grandchildren now, so I stay busy going back and forth with them.
Neat. Well, I congratulate your husband on the shooting range, and this is in North Carolina?
Nacogdoches.
Nacogdoches. Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Nacogdoches, Texas, and that's where I used to buy belts and boots and baseball gloves, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Yeah. That was a long time ago, the baseball gloves, but I assume the leather shops are still there, or the
I
leather
don't know.
factory. Nacogdoches. Yep.
Yeah.
Not too far from Wichita Falls, are you?
Not too far.
And heading towards Dallas, and yes, I know Nacogdoches. but that was a whole nother life ago. That's many lives ago, I think.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, that's great. He has a, and this is we'd like to have him on one of these days.
Well, he's, in fact, I could ask him if you'd want to interview him, because he deals a lot with the Guardian programs, the training, active shooters, things like that. Mm-hmm. So that's his business.
Well, our show Locked and Loaded. Roger Bihar is the host on it, and
okay.
He's a great host and does a great interview. And this is I grew up. I grew up wearing boots and a gun in my hand, and that's sort of the way my family. That's the way it was.
Well,
and,
that's Texas too.
Yeah, and we, I started with a BB gun and shooting sparrows, and then graduated and into other weapons, but that's Texas, and I'm glad I grew up in Texas. It's the greatest state in the world, and one of these days I'll be back, and if they let me in again. They may have the Border Patrol out there stopping me, but anyway, Connie, is there a wind-up word you want to say about your father?
Well, just that, he was probably one of the, I'll start crying. He was one of the finest Americans ever, and he was a true hero, and he didn't want to be, but he was very humble. He didn't want accolades, but he loved this country. Wish there were more men and women like him out there.
Well, in my opinion, the greatest thing that can be said is he did get a Purple Heart and many other awards, but the biggest award is that he left something behind that's still very active today, called the Delta Force.
That's right. He really did.
That
was his legacy.
That puts him in a whole different category from everybody else that even just served. His name is in history, is in Texas, in Georgia history now, the Hall of Fame.
That's right.
And I want to invite everybody that's listening, if you're in Atlanta, go to the Military Hall of Fame, Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and it'll be well worth your while, well worth the time that you spend. Connie Beckwith, thank you. Thank the Lord for people like your father, and He's made this a better place to live. And we will have you back on again, just for the folks that didn't hear this show.
Well, and thank you for getting the word out. God bless you too.
Thank you.
Okay.
And, you've been listening to David's Pick on America's Web Radio. I'm glad to have you listening in today, and want to again thank Connie Beckwith. And we had fun, I had fun, and always learn something. You can always learn from history and always learn from the people that have lived history, and we all are doing that in one shape, form, or fashion. So take care, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. Oh, we got a very special guest. Donna Rowe is coming in. She was a nurse in Vietnam, and she has some stories. You better have your drink handy. Talk to you later. You're listening to America's Web Radio.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.